Today we continue to face the issue of race throughout the world. And with the latest incident in the United States of America has prompted me to talk about race on my YouTube channel. It's my pleasure to have in my midst a special guest. Actually, she's a teacher at one of the private primary schools in Turks and Caicos Islands, and I'll have her introduce herself and tell us what she teaches there as well. Thank you for joining me on my YouTube channel.
My pleasure, absolutely. My name is Shara Goldsmith, and I am an educator, a mindfulness educator, an anti-racism educator. My background is in the performing arts, but I have studied and researched African and diasporic history for about 20 years. My mother was born here in Blue Hills, Dorothy Goldsmith, nee Capron, and my father was born in England. Yes, I moved here maybe 15 years ago, but I grew up in the Bahamas and schooled in England, and also I grew up in the UK.
Okay, well, I think you're the appropriate person to be on the show then. In your opinion, we see the world talking about race, the white race, the black race. Is that something you should be concerned about, or everybody's just from one race?
Well,
what should it matter?
That has changed over the years. The concept of race is a social construct. So when you look biologically at the human species, you see that we are all the same species, and that there is no scientific basis for race, because you can have different flowers of the same species. You can have different breeds of dog, but it doesn't make them a different race. This concept of race came about at a time where there was a need to kind of control the opinions of the public. And there was this Georgian scientist who decided he was going to measure a bunch of skulls and come up with a hierarchy of human in order to justify the dehumanization of one particular kind of human, and that is the African man, in order to obviously justify the transatlantic slave trade and chattel slavery.
So as a result of this, then, we have a society where you have some people feeling inferior, some people feeling superior. Well, and that led to racism?
Somewhat. You have to understand sort of the concept of whiteness. There was no concept of whiteness before this time, because it was more a nationalist identity. People identified with whatever tribe or nationality they were, not what color their skin was.
Really?
Yes. So there was a sort of standing on the stage and painting themselves white in order to call us black. And then so that they had a way of elevating themselves so that they can, subjugate.
So that's what's referred to as whiteness?
Well, whiteness, again, it's a social construct. The idea of whiteness, because when you think about what it is, it's not really culture. Like, white people don't really have a culture. Their culture is kind of to appropriate other cultures. There's a colonist mindset. There's a wanting to dominate and to take over, not only to take over, but to eradicate. The history of genocide that the Europeans have committed on the planet is unbelievable. We're sitting in the Caribbean right now, but we never talk about the Caribbean Holocaust. We talk about the Jewish Holocaust.
You're right.
We do talk about the transatlantic slave trade, but we don't even qualify it as a Holocaust, which it was. It was an African Holocaust, and it wasn't the only one. So you have an entire construct, an ideology that was infiltrated into society at a time where there was already disparities with class. And they needed a way of justifying their sort of economic and psychological warfare.
So this basically then, this white supremacy then was basically taught then? It was more or less taught?
It has been integrated into the fabric of almost every culture and every society. You can go to every continent and see the effects of colonization, white supremacy, the colonist mindset. You know, you don't only just have one type of racism, you know, and racism came before the concept of race.
So what is racism?
Okay. So racism is like an equation, okay, of privilege plus power, okay, and prejudice. That's the equation for racism.
Privilege, power, and prejudice.
So you set up a hierarchy, right? You take all the power away from another group, and then you completely vilify them.
But you have to be a different race, though, because
Well,
can blacks be racist?
well, okay. So remember what I said about what race is. It is an idea that was infiltrated into the psyche of a population of people. Okay, so it has now become, instead of one man's delusion, it has become a collective delusion. There's only one race, the human race. Science proves that. So this construct, okay, that was put there, is a construct that called, you have white people stood upon the stage and painted themselves white. They othered us. We became the other. You understand? So there's a sense of unlearning that not only we have to do in terms of what we've been taught, but white people have to unlearn their own history. And white supremacy is so insidious that it not only has infected the minds of white people for them to think and accept without really even being conscious of it, the reality that exists. Because we know that this is systemic racism. Now, there's a sense of, you know, people asking a lot of questions these days. You know, Black Lives Matter and this idea of, you know, well, I'm not racist. And what we have to understand is that there's something called unconscious racism. People are born into a system. If you're a fish and you live in the sea, you don't know what the sea is. You just know that's where you live. You have no concept of what it is outside of living inside of it. So if you're not aware that we live in this constructed reality where we're being told that this group, and not only being told, but like media, news, literature, art, even in history, we have to dig as Black people to find any little bit. Yet, we built everything. We as African people, birthed everything that you see. There's the scientific proof, again. And this is the thing, is that it is written. White people recorded everything meticulously. They studied. They said all these things. They went into Africa and looked and saw and were amazed. and realized, oh, I can exploit this. I can exploit these people, because that's the colonizing mindset. Okay? There are different levels of whiteness. Okay, I call this the rabbit hole of whiteness.
Okay, let me hear that.
Coming from the idea of what it is, and therefore the subsequent creation of blackness and the vilification of blackness throughout the ages. And if anybody is feeling resistance to this as they listen, I urge you to pay attention to that resistance. What are you really being defensive about? Okay, this is history. It's written. You know, we live in an age of Google. And as Black people, those of us that are educated have to educate ourselves, or we have to really dig and seek this. Okay? So there is white supremacy, as I described, the elevation of one, of the white race over all others. You also have white privilege, right? That hierarchy provides benefits for some, and again, those privileges, as your proximity to whiteness increases, those privileges increase. Okay, you have white fragility, which is when white people are confronted with their own whiteness, they don't know how to grapple with it. Partially because they're not taught.
Do you think they're not aware of it? Is it that they're just not conscious?
It's the default.
Yeah.
It's the default. You ask any, and I have had conversations with actually people whose family members are in this room right now, who have all of a sudden realized and been like, they had never considered it before I mentioned. Look at this magazine. We can look at these magazines, okay? We can look at these magazines and see, who do we have to look for in here? When you're in a crowded room of white people, who you look for? The first Black person you could see. And what are the Black people doing? Serving. What are the white people doing? Enjoying themselves here in this country. You know, this says Take Turks and Caicos magazine. I don't know who Jenna Cooper is. You know, you have all of these things and the faces. This is default. Okay, it's already accepted. So of course you're not aware. Have you ever watched the movie The Matrix?
I haven't watched that, no.
You don't know you're in the Matrix when you're in the Matrix. When you wake up, you realize what the system really is. And when you do awaken to your own whiteness, not only are you going to have that white fragility come up, but you're also going to have white guilt.
White what?
White guilt. Because white people are feeling, human, loving, compassionate, empathic people. Some of them aren't. Some of them are. A lot of them are.
But if we're all from the same race, then we all should have that.
We all should have that
feeling.
Right. But the thing is that I know for a fact that white people, I have white friends, my father's white, white people love you. Yes, you love me. I love you as a human being. We connect and we have meaningful and deep connections. But that doesn't mean that it erases, your goodness erases the system that's literally still in place. You know, when we talk about systemic racism, we talk about the system that was put in place and continued and maintained. And that, yeah, it brings up feelings of guilt. And that's something, like I said, there's something going around, a quote going around right now that, you know, until white people see white supremacy as a white issue, rather than a Black issue they have to empathize with, white supremacy will continue. Okay?
So, right. Interesting. I mean, I'm learning a lot just listening to you. But now, you said your father's white. Your mom is a Black Turks and Caicos Islander. How was life for you growing up as a biracial child or Black child or whatever they call you? I don't know.
Right. So in the realm of the spectrum of colors that exists when it comes to mixed race babies, there are different levels of identity. Again, having to do with, unfortunately, the proximity to blackness or whiteness, depending on how you present. I am a biracial woman. I present black. I identify black. I have never been treated as anything other than black. Now, growing up in the UK in the 1980s, I didn't have that kind of language to even call myself biracial. Like, that wasn't a term that I had ever heard.
So what term did you?
Black.
Oh, black.
Black, yeah. And my parents reinforced that. And when I, came home crying because I was getting teased, I got, posters put up of Jet magazine and maps of Africa and maps of the Bahamas and that archipelago. And I'm proud to be black all over my wall. So that was something that was encouraged and something that, I don't present as white. Some people do, and then they experience what we know as that, again, that white privilege, the proximity to whiteness and light-skinned privilege, and we know as black people that there is an issue with colorism, and what that actually is, guess what? Internalized racism. So you have this bounce back of white supremacy that happens when you inflict this sort of mental when you inflict this sort of mental warping on the psyche of people for hundreds of years, for generations. You don't need to tell them anymore how horrible they are or that they're criminals or thugs, blah, blah, blah. You don't need to do that because they already believe that in yourself. That's what they've heard. That's what everything echoes. Continuing on, talking about sort of the rabbit hole of whiteness, when you talk about the white gaze. So, especially now when black culture is so trending and that, blackness is something that's being talked about, you have a lot of commentary, and you have always had commentary by white people on what they understand about blackness to be. We've had human zoos, we've had medical racism, medical torture, we've had, being tested and just horrible things over the years in the name of science, in the name of religion or bettering or, civilizing the world. You have entire cultures that have been decimated. And that has sort of spilled over into what we call environmental racism, where you see now this colonial mentality spilling over into the animal kingdom now, where the resources are being taken, entire continents are being raped and pillaged and looted for their riches and their wealth. Not only the people are taken and used, but you also have the land. And so, now we have giraffes on the endangered species
So even the animals, you're saying, even the animals?
Well, yeah. Okay. You look at the industrialized systems out from capitalism is a product of white supremacy. Just how the very stars in the sky are made of the same things that are within us, the same basic chemical compounds, is the same way that you cannot unentwine white supremacy from where we find ourselves in the world right now, all over the globe. It is all connected. And that's why I believe in decolonizing education, teaching the truth, and teaching world history. Every child should learn world history, not just a narrow, one-sided story. Right.
Well, Shara, I want to thank you for taking the time to do this channel. It's very informative. I can see that you are well versed in this area. In fact, I've learned quite a lot today on the different levels. And thank you very much. And do you have any closing remarks before we go into our next segment?
I do. I have something to say to the Black community. Just take care of yourselves. Unplug. Self-love is revolutionary. Rest is revolutionary. This is our time. And, don't be afraid to speak up and call a thing a thing. To the white community, we love y'all. We do. I have friends and family that are white. If I did not love you, I would not correct you. So come to these kinds of conversations with an open mind and an open heart and listen to Black people.